Rogers TV. Barrie.
Welcome to another episode of Let's Be Perfectly Queer on Rogers TV Barrie. I am very pleased to have a returning guest with us on today's show, my buddy Jayce Carver, all the way from Windsor, Ontario. Jayce is the founder and executive director of the Windsor-Essex Transgender and Allied Support Services, the first trans-focused and trans-led organization in all of Canada. Jayce was on the show about a month ago now and gave us some insight into her story and her journey. And unfortunately, our time got cut all too short. And I know I said at the end of that episode that we would definitely have Jayce back. And after a little bit of reflection, Jayce has agreed to come back on the show and share some more of her story. So Jayce, welcome back to Let's Be Perfectly Queer.
Thanks so much for having me back, Randy. Yeah, it was after a lot of reflection. There's a lot of fear attached to telling our story, regardless of whether you're in recovery or an addict or whatever, because there's always consequences, right, to telling our story publicly. One of the consequences that I had faced, first of all, was just a lot of positive ones, right? Like a lot of people reaching out to me saying, thank you for telling that story. Thank you for giving voice to what I'm going through. And then on the flip side, we always have the haters, right? So I was at dinner with my mom and my now partner, Robert, and I was picking up voicemails, and there was a voicemail of someone repeatedly saying they were going to shoot me in the face, right? So it's that fear when there's always these consequences, right? But I'm so proud of the work that we get to do as a community. I'm so grateful to have this platform, Randy, that you provide to me to be able to tell my story. And obviously my story is not unique, right? We know in the work we do, we hear all too much stories very similar to mine. And it's so important to give people hope, and I hope that that's what we are able to accomplish through this and get people connected to services that are going to work for them. So
yeah, well, I think I mentioned to you before that, and I have no way of actually gauging the viewership through Rogers, but I can certainly, when I upload these shows after the fact to my YouTube channel, the Let's Be Perfectly Queer YouTube channel, and our episode from a month ago has got more views than any other episode I've done so far in this inaugural season of the show. So I think that's wonderful that we've been able to expand beyond Simcoe Muskoka, and that your story and your reach is actually getting out there to folks that might not have otherwise heard it. So
yeah, that's when you said that, actually, when you said I think it was yesterday or like last week sometime, when you said that the episode that we had taped together got the most views of any episode. And I just think it's because it's honest and it's authentic, and you and I have, because we're so close, an ability to have a conversation that doesn't feel scripted, right? Like it's just about truth telling. And I think that people really gravitate to that because they're tired of hearing professionals just talk about textbook ways to get well. They want to hear the truth behind our story. And I think that that's what we're able to accomplish together.
Yeah, I mean, lived experience is huge when it comes to talking about any story, really. But certainly to be able to share your authentic self and to share it without shame or guilt or fear is really important for other folks who are experiencing similar challenges, right? So let's get right into it. And
Sure.
This is a quote from our last episode. I just got finished watching it again as sort of a lead up to this show. And you said, I quote, "It took some pretty dire things to take place in my life to be able to find, the right time to share my story." That's that's not an exact quote, but it's the gist of it. So let's start with that. Just share some more. Give us your story.
Let's talk about the dire things that needed to take place. And that's the thing is, having gone through several forms of treatment again in the last year and a bit. and really prioritizing myself, and even having to take a step back from the organization that I had built, has provided me an opportunity to make peace with some of those things and not be afraid to share them anymore. And so for that, so some of those dire things were, I know the first time in active addiction, we talked about that I was doing street work, that I was homeless, living in my car. My husband and I were separated. He let me come back to the family home, and I attempted suicide several times, and this, so then you get well, right? You go through the process of getting well, you go to treatment, your life starts to unfold, you start to be aware of the expectations on you now that you're in recovery and have founded an organization that is the first of its kind in Canada. You're flying all over the place, you're doing training sessions, and this public image is what you then try to maintain and not your recovery. And our recovery community is still founded deeply in the idea that once you pick up, you are down here, you are starting over, you're down here again with the guilt and the shame, and that your life is no good, you can't be a productive member of society because you're using a substance. And it's disheartening, and it feels impossible to get well in that moment. And trying to cloak yourself in a veil of sobriety, and I say a veil of sobriety because that's what it was over the last year, and maintain all of the balls that you now have in the air. You start to isolate outside of the roles that you're supposed to be in, right? And so going through the divorce, my mom becoming terminally ill. And I'm not divorced yet, but we were still in that process. And then there's a whole other part of this story that's not mine, right? It's his, right? And so there's very little I can share about that. But coming to some realizations on what my role was in that marriage and the dishonesties that were going on there really made me look at myself as not worthy, and kept me ill for a very long time. And I needed help again. There is no way that I could get through, and I didn't want it, to be honest with you. I needed help, but didn't want it because I was so stuck in my pain that I couldn't even imagine that life could be different than the way I originally imagined it. And the way I originally imagined it was this man I met at 17 years old. We would grow old together. We would retire. We were a power couple in the LGBTQ community, I thought. And my half of my identity went away with that marriage, right? And I didn't know how to rebuild myself anymore. And it took me having to walk away from everything I had built here for a period of time. I went off in January after a relapse, a very, very hard relapse, and a subsequent sexual assault. This is something that's unfortunately a regular occurrence in the life of a trans woman who, especially under the influence of substances, where you're too afraid to say no or can't protect yourself, right? And it was a very physically violent as well as sexually violent experience. And I had made a decision in that moment that I was going to contact my board, be completely honest about where I was with my recovery, what was going on in my life, and say that I need to walk away until I have treatment. Sorry, I'll turn my phone off. Until I have treatment. And immediately got into a program here in Windsor-Essex at the House of Soft-Scene. It was an outpatient treatment program that dealt very much with codependency as well as trauma. It was very trauma-based. And still worked in some of the 12 steps from traditional 12-step recovery. And so it was a great jumping off point. I had a hard time staying sober in that program. I kept on, because you go home at nighttime, right? So after a day, but the counselors were amazing. It was very inclusive. It was very different than my first time around in 2015, right? People have a better narrative today around trans identities and inclusivity. So it was a women's only program as well, right? So it was surrounded by all cisgender women, but other women. And I did that for 4 weeks while waiting to get into addictions program at Westover again. So the same program I went to in 2015, they welcomed me back in order to engage in the 19-day chemical dependency program. And I was seeing Dr. Fargo here locally, who is an addictions doctor. So, the accountability of random drug testing, which I needed, a drug counselor, which I was able to meet with on a regular basis and talk honestly. They were harm reduction based, which is so important, and they were shameless, guiltless service. So even if I went in and I had drugs in my system, we barely just briefly talked about the fact that there was drugs in my system, and it was more around, what did you learn from this relapse? How can we make this relapse something you can learn from? What can we put in place as safety protocol? And you have nothing to feel guilty or ashamed of. And if you are a drug user, you can still be fully productive, a member of society, right? Like that.
How was that different from 5 years ago when you first entered the program at Westover?
Well, this is not Westover. This is Dr. Fargo. Westover is still an abstinence-based program. I think with entering into Westover, I've worked with Westover over the last 5 years around trans inclusivity. I've done workshops. I've spoken at the Addictions Ontario Conference 3 years in a row. I was scheduled this year as well. Westover too does not believe in shame-based recovery. Even though they're 12-step model, they don't believe in shame-based recovery. They always just talk about you just pick up, and you don't lose the recovery that you had built just because you picked up a substance. You still have all that knowledge. You still have all that knowledge, and you can still move ahead. They've also added a lot of things to their program around self-esteem and like some women's workshops and stuff like that. And the work I did in Westover this time was really about letting go of my expectations, and starting to live more in the moment, and a lot more around mindfulness. And that was something that I used to do in recovery, and then it doesn't. If you don't practice it, you lose it, right? So you stop staying in the moment. You always, especially when you're building an organization, you're always looking to the future. You always have to look into the future to try to build success for the organization. Make sure that your supports are meeting the client's needs. Unfortunately, when you live outside of today as a person in recovery, you get panic, you get fear, you get you get discouraged, and then you generally, the only way that most people in recovery know how to deal with those things is by picking up a substance or another drug of choice, which could be sex, could be food, could be anything, right? So I did the 19-day program. I came out, and I used almost right away. Like almost right away, because I came out to Corona. The entire world had changed, right? When I went in, everything was normal, and we were only hearing about cases like in China and Italy, and you're in a bubble in treatment, and very little information around what it was going to look like when we got out. And when we got out, our city here was on complete lockdown. So I didn't yet have the resources to jump into online meetings or any of those things. And so I started using pretty quickly, and I saw the pattern getting worse right away. And it wasn't like a constant use. There was a couple relapses, and then I just became tired of that. And
I'm sure you've probably heard a lot of similar stories as a result of the coronavirus and COVID-19, and how that's affected folks with substance use disorder.
I know that in the queer and trans population specifically, we're seeing a 60% relapse rate for those that have long-term sobriety. So we're talking over 5 years sobriety. And so the isolation is the consequences are people are relapsing. Again, they're staying in dangerous situations longer than they should because they don't want to be alone. So they're quarantining with an abuser. What I also see is that sex workers are not being properly cared for during COVID, as well as addicts. So our homeless population, underserved, underrepresented, and we're seeing that cause a lot of mental effects on our clients. And so we're also seeing an increase in suicidality and suicidal ideation, right? So, and that comes to where we are right now, right? What we're doing as an organization right now, and this is the first time I want to announce this, but you and I talked about it a little bit, Randy. So yeah. I've used my lived experience as well as working alongside some community professionals to say, what is the best that every form of recovery has to offer? You know, I feel like we silo recovery, right? Like there's 12-step and that's the only way. Or there's harm reduction, which means that people are all using drugs and like that's the only way. And so I wanted to kind of do a mixture of what I've done this past time around that I feel like it lends to the success I'm currently having in my recovery. And that's by taking the best of all these programs and trying to mix it together to do an outpatient program here out of We Trans Support, which we were able to get funded, which I'm shocked about, right? Like, it's amazing. It's amazing. Yes. So we have a pot of funding to do this. I can't announce the funder yet, but that will be coming in the next few days. So the theory behind this program is that we need a medical practitioner attached to it. So we have an addictions doctor attached to it, which also allows us to do the urine screens, do exactly what I was doing, meeting with a drug counselor, meeting with the doctor, making sure that mental health medications as they're required are being prescribed and monitored. So that's an important first piece. But before you even get to that stage, we meet people where they're at with harm reduction supplies and information. So you do not have to be sober or even desire to be completely sober or to completely be abstinent to be a part of this program, because abstinence is not necessarily the only form of recovery that somebody wants. There's people that just want to be able to manage their addiction better so that they can be productive in society. And a lot of people would disagree with the fact that that's even possible, but we have to start somewhere. And we're not doing addiction services based on our own personal opinions here. We want to meet people where they are, reduce their harm, and try to get them involved in society. And eventually, if they want to get to abstinence-based recovery, we're going to have a route to that. So it starts with meeting.
For that to be effective, that has to be the individual's choice too, right?
Absolutely. We are not going to impose. Like, my personal belief system is that recovery doesn't have to just be abstinence-based at all. I know people in recovery who wanted to learn to put down crystal meth but still want to drink, in a more monitored way. Who am I to judge that? Who am I to say that that's not the right way to do things? The key behind the program that we're offering right now is no matter where you are in your ideology around recovery or what you want your recovery to look like, we're going to support you in that process in a non-judgmental, trauma-informed way. Because many of the people, trauma is the basis of addiction. It just is. Somebody's been through some stuff, and they need some support. So it starts with harm reduction, medical support, and then it goes into drug counseling, mindfulness, meditation, yoga, and then peer support. So we were able to get funded for practitioners, healthcare practitioners, and peer supporters. And that peer support piece is key. So when we look at the model of 12-step recovery and we think about AA and its founding back in the 30s and 40s, what kept people encouraged and on a track of sobriety was being able to meet with the other alcoholic, right? Sure. And share their story and get advice from each other on how to stay sober, right? And I know in my own journey, I have a sponsor through Narcotics Anonymous. I don't. And
the whole idea of sponsors, that is peer support.
It is, right. So I've taken some of what I've learned from 12-step recovery, and I've included it in here as well. So I know that many LGBT people have a real hard time with 12-step recovery because it talks a lot about God, right, and higher power, and religious systems have hurt us so much historically, and still actually are. And it's hard for us to grasp that this is not a religious program because of the word God so much. And all the tags, the lines and the tags that they say of, your higher power could be whatever you want it to be, but yet they still have the word God in there over and over instead of higher power. It makes us question the program, right? But I look at the program for the psychology behind it. When we look at the 12 steps, it's not just about something magical happening. It's about you actually doing the work to get through a trauma. To get through trauma, have acceptance, learn to live in the moment, and then try to help somebody else, because doing good for others makes you feel good. It makes you feel inspired. So that whole process of 12-step recovery, there's so much psychology behind it that many of the people that attended, they don't even notice it, right? They don't even notice they're part of this process of healing a trauma and moving forward and forgiving themselves and forgiving those who have done them wrong. They have no idea they're part of that process. We're going to make that more evident. So we're going to provide access also to 12-step recovery and smart recovery, which has been actually catching on like wildfire in many addictions communities because it removes that religious piece from addiction services. So we're really excited to be launching this program. It's we're starting. I have some of the counselors and stuff coming in today, so we can build some additional policy around the program, get some job postings out there, and get started on because we already have people coming to the center asking for addiction supports, right? So now we actually could, because we have the money, we could actually provide these services in an amazing way. And we're not looking at just doing this in Windsor-Essex. This funding is for Windsor-Essex, yes, but you know that I always blur some lines in the work that I do because it doesn't exist anywhere else. This is the first harm reduction based, non-shame based, trauma-informed chemical dependency program specifically for our community in Canada, because I like to do things that way. And so we are going to find ways to provide these services online as well. So you'll be able to dial into a yoga session and participate in yoga. You'll be able to dial into a Zoom group meeting if you're not from our community. So you could do that peer support piece. And then I'll find additional funds for people from other areas by working with other areas to provide our drug counseling, access to our healthcare practitioner, things like that. So I want to make sure that I'm not just thinking of just this community. I'm thinking about our entire country and how this has reached epidemic proportions in our community. We know that addiction services have not met the mark for us since the beginning. I'm an example of that, where I had to file suit against an addiction center for not providing these services, and then I had to explain to different addiction agencies that my identity is a valid identity, and that I'm not actually there for being trans. I'm there because I can't put down substances and I need to deal with some trauma, because everybody's always so curious about my identity and my surgical status and all these things, that that's what they want to ask about. Even this last time in Westover, being as well known at Westover as I am by the staff, and as welcomed and received really well by staff, I had a person calling me it for the entire first week. Again, like I did in 2015, it was so triggering. But I'm a different person today, right? I know how to advocate. I know how to do it with a smile. And so but that responsibility that we put on a trans person makes it so that they can't necessarily get the benefits of the program, right? I felt like I was in survival mode for the first 4 days of the first week. And then as that person got closer to leaving, which was at the end of that week, then I was feeling safer in my skin. But I had to go to staff and say, you know what, this is happening. I need it to stop, or they need to go home. And I want to know how you would prefer me to deal with this. Either I could deal with it directly with that individual, I could deal with the entire group. I had no plan on coming out of the closet this time in treatment. I just wanted to go in as a person needing recovery. But unfortunately, these circumstances forced me to have to come out of the closet to protect myself so that I could focus on my program. And so I did that. I ended up having to stand in front of the entire group of like 30 people and say, I hear that I'm being called it. Like I hear it. I know that this is happening, and we're all here for the same reason. So I identified myself as an addict, an alcoholic, and a trans woman. And I said, but what you don't know is these are the things I've accomplished after coming to Westover. Right. And I talked about these accomplishments speaking at the House of Commons around inclusive healthcare services and things like that. And then I said, so if we all just focus on ourselves, all of us could achieve those kinds of things. Right. And that I would no longer be addressed by anything other than Jayce and she and her while I was there, or these people would probably have to face some consequences for harassment. But I'm confident enough to do that. An average queer or trans person going to treatment at the lowest point in their life, and they're facing that, they're not going to tell a staff person because they just want to fly under the radar. There's that fear of having to be out to the entire organization. There's the fear that will take precedence over your recovery, and so that's why we're doing this program. And starting as an outpatient now so that we can build the statistics to prove that we need a center that is OHIP covered and funded by the Ministry of Health specifically for queer and trans people. That includes homelessness services, whether you're an addict or not. So shelter services specifically for our community, because we know that we don't have fair access to shelter, addiction services, and then all the other drop-in services that we provide. So that's what we're trying to prove as a community here in Windsor-Essex, is that this is required, and I'm going to keep fighting until that kind of center exists. So, I think it's so valuable. I think it's so needed. And what we can start seeing people in our community in positions of power and leadership by providing them these services. And that's the other key to this program we wrote, is that once you've gone through the program, you get to start becoming a leader in that program and support other individuals, right? There's opportunities for employment as peer mentors, specifically for addictions folks or harm reduction workers. And that's the key behind it, is provide volunteer opportunity, give people a sense of belonging and passion and purpose in their life, and then show them you appreciate that, because nobody should have to work for free. So that's the roundup piece, right? That's the roundup piece.
And that's fantastic. And I think you hit on a very key point there of developing leaders out of the program. And and then we in the HIV sector, particularly here in Ontario, but it's stretched to BC and Quebec as well. Through the Ontario AIDS Network, we run a program called the Peer Leadership Development Institute. And it's all for folks living with HIV and to develop those people into leaders, whatever a leader looks like for them. It's not a specific, this is what a leader looks like, this is what you must do. It's how you as each individual can develop those leadership skills that best suit your circumstances, your community, where you're at. And that really does make a difference. And I think what you've done just with WeTrans support absolutely shows what that sort of leadership can look like and what you can gain from it. So I think that's absolutely wonderful. We are, as always, this time with you just flies by.
How come you never get to talk? I think I just talk too much.
No, that's good. I've told you this before. That's the whole point of this show, is to give my guests a platform to share their story and update us on what needs to happen out there. And you're a perfect person to do that. So you've got 2 minutes to just give me a quick wrap up of how you're feeling and what your hopes are for the future.
Well, today we reopened our office space, right? So I'm really excited about that. So we're moving services back into the office space, but we're going to keep all of the services that we had put online as well, because what we learned in the process is that there's people far outside of this community that need the same support that we are able to offer here at WeTrans Support, and they're having a hard time finding in other communities. Also, the partnerships that we've been able to build through doing things through COVID, that it's a new way of working. It's an amazing new way of working. We're out of silos and into communication, and that's going to be the key to building a strong queer and trans community. So for again, thank you, Randy, for always working with me and for always providing platform for our voice in this community. Often the trans voice is still put behind the queer voice, and you've definitely used your privilege as a white gay man to always provide opportunities for people from more marginalized communities. Not just me, but I've watched some other episodes. So good on you, and keep doing the amazing work you're doing over there.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think it's important work, and I certainly want to connect with you more around the work you're doing and the funding that you've received for these new programs to hopefully implement something similar here in Simcoe Muskoka as well, that we can work towards. So
I can't wait till we could actually go out there.
Oh, I know.
Go and visit, and then look at what you all are doing, and then just share. I love sharing.
Yeah. I need a Jayce like more than anything else right now. So
yeah, right.
At any rate, thank you again for being on the show. Really appreciate it. I think we do definitely have more to discuss around this issue and others. So we'll see you on the show again real soon. And so thank you again. Thank all of you for watching another episode of Let's Be Perfectly Queer. Tune in again next week, and we'll see who's on the show then. Have a good night.
Bye, folks.
The following program contains a topic which may not be suitable for young viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
At Kawartha Dairy, it's been 80 years of fresh, delicious dairy products and 80 years of incredible memories. We've come a long way since 1937, and it's all thanks to our amazing customers. Thank you, Ontario. Here's to 80 more years.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line. Email us